The heavy leather folders slid across the white linen tablecloth and stopped exactly an inch from my plate. 50 elite Silicon Valley investors went dead silent in the private banquet room. My father stood at the head of the table, desperately masking his looming bankruptcy behind a wall of strict patriarchal discipline. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at the dotted line. He demanded I surrender my 15% maternal trust fund to my older brother's company right then and there. He needed my money as collateral to save his failing construction empire. Yet he pitched this extortion to his billionaire friends as a necessary lesson in family loyalty for a stubborn, ungrateful daughter. Junji, my older brother, leaned back in his leather chair and smirked. A few men in expensive tailored suits actually chuckled, swirling their vintage wine. I stared at the gold pen resting on the contract. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat, picked up the pen, and calmly checked my watch. They thought I was the exact same naive 26-year-old girl they had bullied my entire life. They assumed my silence was submission. My father looked down at me with absolute contempt, fully believing he had cornered me using the crushing social pressure of his elite peers. He forgot one crucial detail. I spent the last 6 years building enterprise threat detection systems in the absolute shadows. I audit predators for a living. And this trap they thought they set for me was actually the final stage of my own. To understand the sheer audacity of my father's demand, you need to understand the currency of our family. Love was never freely given. It was strictly financed. And I was always deemed a terrible investment. The reality of their cruelty snapped into perfect focus 4 years ago during my junior year of college. A severe kidney infection landed me in a sterile, freezing hospital room. My fever was spiking. My vision was blurring. And the hospital administration required a $500 emergency copay up front. I called my father, my voice shaking, begging for a temporary transfer. He sighed heavily into the receiver. He told me I needed to learn financial responsibility, called my illness a convenient excuse to avoid my exam, and hung up. I sat on that thin paper sheet, shivering, listening to the dial tone. The very next morning, a jeweler's receipt accidentally synced to our shared family cloud account. My father had just purchased a $50,000 luxury watch for Junji's mistress to keep a messy scandal quiet. They let me bleed out over $500. They chose to protect my brother's toxic infidelity over my basic survival. I survived that hospital stay by taking out a predatory payday loan, working night shifts at a diner until my hands cracked and bled. But sitting in that cold hospital room, something inside me permanently shifted. The desperate, approval-seeking daughter completely died. A profound, freezing clarity took her place. They had absolutely no idea that their financial starvation was the exact catalyst that would eventually make me bulletproof. Every rejected plea for help, every condescending remark became the raw fuel I used to build my empire. I partnered with a brilliant financial strategist named Ya Wen. Together, we rented a windowless supply closet, slept on cheap foam mats, and wrote the complex cybersecurity architecture that would soon protect the largest logistics networks in the country. We built a ghost ship. We built it in complete silence, while my father bragged to his country club friends about my brother's mediocre achievements. Now, back in the blinding light of the exclusive banquet room, the air grew incredibly thin. My father tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon, drawing the entire room's attention. He puffed out his chest, his face flushed with narcissistic triumph. He loudly declared that women belong in the back office, supporting the real men who build tangible, physical things out of concrete and steel. He mocked my little computer hobby. Junji leaned over. The smell of expensive cologne and stale whiskey radiating off him, and whispered that if I embarrassed them tonight, I would be permanently banned from our mother's upcoming birthday celebration. They were running their classic playbook: isolate, humiliate, and extort. My father held out his hand, waiting for the signed contract. He desperately needed that trust fund collateral. His eyes were wide. Manik, completely addicted to his own manufactured authority. I set the pen down. At that exact second, 50 smartphones in the room buzzed in absolute unison. The sound was a heavy, vibrating wave that rattled the fine china. The wealthy investors frowned, pulling their devices from their suit pockets. One man near the window gasped. Another dropped his fork, the silver clattering loudly against his porcelain plate. The room plunged into a suffocating, terrified silence. The financial push notification had just hit every major news outlet simultaneously. Data Halo, the cybersecurity firm I founded in a windowless closet, just went public on the stock exchange. The opening bell had rung 10 minutes ago. The headline glared back at them in stark black and white. Our initial public offering exploded, minting a valuation of $2.6 billion. And my name alongside a high-definition photograph of my face was stamped directly on the front page as the majority shareholder and chief executive officer. I watched my father's brain try to process the catastrophic paradigm shift. The blood evacuated from his face so fast his skin turned the color of wet ash. His jaw went completely slack. His hands began to tremble violently. He looked down at his phone, then up at me, then back down at the screen. The brutal, undeniable arithmetic was crushing the oxygen out of his lungs. I did not raise my voice. I reached into my tailored blazer and withdrew a solid black titanium corporate card. I slid it across the table to the waiting general manager. I told my father to keep his pen. I informed the room, my voice completely devoid of emotion, that I didn't just pay for this dinner. I quietly purchased the commercial holding company that owned this entire restaurant 3 weeks ago. I slid a second document out of my folder and pushed it directly over his pathetic trust fund contract. It was a legal default notice. My father stared at the dense legal text, his eyes darting frantically. He asked me what this was, his voice cracking, sounding incredibly small and fragile. I leaned forward. I explained the mechanics of his ruin slowly, ensuring every billionaire in the room heard every single syllable. When his construction empire started hemorrhaging money 6 months ago, he took out a massive high-risk mezzanine loan from an anonymous private equity firm to stay afloat. He defaulted on that loan last week. I owned that private equity firm, and the strict legal covenant of that specific debt explicitly stated that upon default, his 51% controlling voting shares automatically transferred to the creditor. I looked dead into his terrified eyes. I told him he was no longer the chief executive officer of his own company. I fired him from his own board of directors right there, in front of the exact elite circle he worshipped. I told him he was trespassing on my property, and I asked the general manager to escort him out. The public humiliation was absolute. My father tried to stand, his knees buckling slightly. Junji looked like a cornered animal, his arrogant smirk entirely erased. They stumbled out of the private dining room under the piercing, judgmental stares of the very men they had tried to impress. The empire of concrete had just been absolutely obliterated by an empire of code. You might think the story ends there with the grand public victory. But toxic entitlement never surrenders quietly. A narcissist backed into a corner will always strike one final desperate time. Exactly 2 weeks later, the false emergency triggered. My phone rang late at night. It was my mother's private nurse, her voice frantic, claiming my mother had collapsed and was rushed to a private VIP clinic across town. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my chest. Despite everything, the biological instinct to protect a parent is a heavy chain to break. I abandoned my corporate headquarters and drove recklessly through the rain to the clinic. I sprinted through the sliding glass doors and pushed into the VIP recovery suite. There were no doctors. There were no heart monitors. My mother was sitting perfectly upright in a plush armchair, sipping chamomile tea. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. She stared at the floral wallpaper, her hands shaking slightly. She whispered an apology. She told me my father threatened to cut off her credit cards and cancel her country club membership if she didn't keep me at the clinic for exactly 1 hour. A profound, sickening realization washed over me. She wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was an active, complicit bait. She weaponized my lingering love for her just to maintain her comfortable lifestyle. While I was standing in that clinic staring at the woman who birthed me, Junji was making his final fatal move. Armed with a massive gambling debt and my father's desperate rage, my brother blackmailed a junior night shift maintenance worker to prop open a freight elevator at my tech headquarters. Surveillance footage later showed Junja creeping into my executive office. He bypassed the main servers and went straight for my desk. He pried open the bottom drawer with a crowbar and pulled out a sleek, unmarked laptop. He plugged a rogue flash drive directly into the terminal, intending to plant malicious spyware, frame me for corporate fraud, and blackmail me into returning their company. He thought he was a criminal mastermind. He had absolutely no idea he had just stepped into a federal bear trap. I anticipated their desperation perfectly. That laptop in my desk was a decoy. It was a heavily monitored, federally compliant honeypot terminal. The absolute second Junja's unauthorized flash drive connected to that port, a silent enterprise-level security lockdown triggered. The electronic doors to the executive suite magnetically sealed. His badge access to the stairwells was instantly revoked. The system autonomously compiled the intrusion logs, captured his face on 6 different hidden cameras, and transmitted a verified cyber intrusion alert directly to the federal authorities. I didn't need to race back to the office to confront him. I simply stood in the clinic, pulled out my phone, and watched the live security feed. 10 minutes later, the lobby of my headquarters was swarming with agents from the cyber division. They dragged Junji out in handcuffs. The charges were catastrophic. Unauthorized breach of a publicly traded enterprise network falls under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It is a severe federal felony carrying decades in prison. Because my father used his remaining company's servers and resources to orchestrate the cyber attack, my legal team immediately collaborated with the authorities to initiate civil asset forfeiture. The government seized the remaining heavy machinery, the commercial real estate, and the bank accounts as instruments of a federal crime. My father was left with absolutely nothing. No compine, no reputation, no legacy. Junji was denied bail. He sits in a federal holding facility, waiting for a sentencing hearing that will effectively end his life as a free man. My father was permanently exiled from his social circles, forced to move into a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, dodging calls from furious creditors. As for my mother, the passive enabler who traded my safety for a credit card limit, I established a strict, immovable boundary. My lawyers set up a third-party managed trust that pays her a modest, non-negotiable monthly stipend. It covers her basic groceries and a small apartment. I do not manage the funds. I do not take her calls. I permanently blocked their numbers, entirely severing the toxic bloodline with cold, impenetrable legal precision. Today, my life is incredibly quiet. The heavy, dark shadow of my family's demands is permanently gone. I stand in my massive corner office looking out over the sprawling Silicon Valley skyline alongside Yawen, my chosen family. We drink incredible coffee. We close massive international deals. And we sleep soundly at night without the constant gnawing anxiety of waiting for the next betrayal. People often ask me, usually in hushed tones after I give keynote speeches, if I regret destroying my family. They ask if the holidays feel lonely. They wonder how a daughter can send her own brother to federal prison and bankrupt her father without losing her mind to guilt. The truth is, peace is incredibly quiet when you finally stop inviting chaos to your dinner table. Surviving a narcissistic family system requires a brutal rewiring of everything society teaches you about loyalty. Through the fire of the last 6 years, I had to carve out 3 fundamental rules just to survive. Rule number 1, blood is nothing more than a biological accident. Loyalty is a daily active choice. Society will try to guilt trip you into carrying the heavy burdens of your abusers simply because you share a last name or a genetic code. Do not let DNA be a free pass for constant disrespect. If a stranger treated you the way your toxic family does, you would have called the police years ago. Treat their abuse with the exact same zero tolerance policy. Rule number 2, the ultimate revenge is never a screaming match. It is silent, undeniable leverage. Toxic people feed on your emotional reactions. When you yell, when you cry, when you beg them to understand your pain, you are handing them the exact power they crave. They want to see you unhinged so they can call you crazy. Deny them that supply. Do not argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. Outgrow them, out-earn them, outsmart them. Build an empire so massive and structurally sound that their opinions mathematically no longer matter. Let your success be the loudest sound in the room. Rule number 3, you absolutely must be willing to grieve the family you deserved in order to survive the family you actually have. This is the hardest part of the journey. The false hope that they will wake up one day, apologize, and finally love you properly is the exact chain that keeps you trapped in their cycle. My mother's betrayal in that clinic taught me that sometimes the passive enabler is infinitely more dangerous than the active abuser because they weaponize your desperate hope. You have to mourn the parents you wish you had. Bury that fantasy. Once you accept exactly who they are, their actions can never surprise or destroy you again. The greatest inheritance I ever received from my father was the stark, freezing realization that I was entirely on my own. It forced me to build my own table in the dark. Look closely at your own circle. Have you ever found yourself suffocating under the heavy, unbearable weight of a toxic family dynamic. Have you ever had to walk away from the exact people who were supposed to protect and nurture you? Did you ever have to build your success in complete, terrifying silence just to avoid their sabotage? If you chose your own peace over their toxic chaos, drop a 1 in the comments below. Share your story. Let the people reading know they are not alone in this fight. Subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who desperately needs to hear it today. And never forget, your absolute resilience is your greatest equity. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there thinking, why did she even show up to that banquet? Why did she rush to the clinic when she already knew exactly how manipulative they were? It is incredibly easy to judge from the outside looking in, but when you are dealing with your own family, you aren't operating on pure logic. You are trapped in what psychology calls the slot machine effect, or intermittent reinforcement. Her family starved her of affection and support, but every once in a while, they offered a tiny crumb of hope, an invitation to a birthday, a sudden phone call, a medical emergency that made her feel needed. She wasn't stupid, and neither are you if you have been in this position. She was addicted to the biological hope that this time, just maybe, she would hit the jackpot and get the family she actually deserved. Toxic people know this. They use your empathy as the coin to keep you playing their rigged game. But what makes this story an absolute masterclass isn't just the emotional realization, it is the financial self-defense. Let's break down Wan Ting's exact street smart moves so you can apply them to your own life. First, look at the audit strategy. When her father threw that trust fund contract on the table, he relied entirely on public pressure and urgency to force a signature. Manipulators and scammers hate details. They thrive on chaos and manufactured deadlines. Wan Ting didn't argue or try to defend herself. She audited his reality. By quietly acquiring his defaulted mezzanine debt beforehand, she stripped away his illusion of power. The lesson here, never, ever sign anything under emotional duress. Take a step back, audit the situation in silence, and bring the receipt. Second, she mastered the art of building the case. When her brother broke into her headquarters, her instinct wasn't to rush in, yell at him, or physically confront him. She let the federal honeypot trap do the heavy lifting. She relied on immutable server logs and security cameras. In your everyday life, this means taking the emotion out of the conflict and documenting absolutely everything. Save the text messages, forward the threatening emails, keep the bank statements, let the hard evidence do the screaming for you. Finally, she executed the buyout. Look at how she handled her complicit mother at the end of the story. She didn't leave her on the street, but she absolutely did not hand her a blank check or an open door. She set up a third-party managed trust with a strict, non-negotiable stipend. She essentially bought out her own freedom and outsourced the emotional labor to a lawyer. Sometimes the best investment you will ever make is paying whatever financial cost it takes to legally and structurally close the door on toxic people forever. Here is the ultimate verdict. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. And you cannot negotiate with people who view your independence as a direct threat to their control. Protect your peace like it is a billion-dollar asset, because it is. Have you ever had to use an audit strategy or a buyout to escape a toxic dynamic? Tell me how you protected your assets, both financial and mental, in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more street smart survival strategies. And remember, your peace of mind is never up for negotiation.